Good afternoon, welcome to the UK Economy Live. It's the 6th of February 2013 and it's just gone 1 o'clock. Myself and Brian Gerrish and Mike Robinson are here as always. Afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well, it's quite a nice day in Plymouth. We've got a bit of...
Switch your mic on.
We've got a small technical problem. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, apologies there. We have quite a nice day in Plymouth, some blue sky, it's very cold, chilly southwesterly wind, and I think the longer forecast is it's going to get colder. Certainly quite cold in the studio today.
Very.
What have you got for us?
I've got a story from RT this morning. The UK are planning to broaden online domestic spying, and apparently the UK officials are planning to monitor Britain's online activities by placing surveillance devices on the telecom networks. The programme will keep tabs on which website we visit and who we contact and when. The British Parliamentary Intelligence Security Committee published their report outlining a massive national surveillance programme based in the country's very electronic infrastructure. The government has said the installation of the probes will be critical in the online fight against terrorism and other crimes, as the content of emails or Skype calls would not necessarily be collected. So more spying on us, more Big Brother.
Well, it's absolutely Big Brother, but for me it's just incredible that I spent quite a lot of time active with the military in the Cold War, and of course the threat then was the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, well known for their spying on individuals. And now things have changed so that we have the Russians kindly warning us of surveillance within our own country. Why is this happening? I think the simple answer is that the criminal government that we actually have in power at the moment is starting to realise that the truth is coming out. So it's really 1984, everything's turned on its head. If you tell the truth, you become some sort of terrorist, whereas the domestic terrorists and the magic circle are in Westminster. Yeah. So if you're worried about what's going on, make sure you tell other people that slowly but surely we have 3 so-called parties turning Britain into a dictatorship. And don't talk less, talk more. What we need are hundreds of millions of people, of communications between people in Britain every day, because this is the way to get round the surveillance system. So if you're fed up with the government spying on you as if you're a criminal, talk more, not less. That's the advice from UK Column Live.
Thanks, Brian.
No doubt we're going to knock on the door later this afternoon. Where does that take us?
Bisphenol A now. Not many people are aware of this chemical, but we can find it in plastic bottles, tin cans, even on till receipts. This chemical it was highlighted back in 2010 in a Mail article, which I think we'll bring up in a minute, but here on Natural Society they're really highlighting it, saying that over the past century the average age for girls' first period has dropped from the age of 16 to 17 to 12 to 13. Some girls are even seeing breasts at 7-year-olds from the age of 7. It's making men more feminine, and this is really just highlighting the dangers of this chemical and where it's being found. And I think you've got the Daily Mail article there that they were highlighting it back in 2010. But it's just becoming even more and more obvious, especially after a study showed 1,051 girls between the age of 6 and 8 in the States found that 3 of all the chemical classes within this BPA were detected at high levels within the girls' urine. About 1/3 of the girls went through puberty prematurely.
Yeah, so something's happening, and it's
any way they can, well, it seems any way they can poison us, they'll do it, as much as going into their plastic bottles and tins and even on receipts.
Well, to my mind, and perhaps I'm being suspicious, and maybe it's actually factual, this ties in, of course, with the fact that we're slowly but surely seeing more evidence which the government is pushing us towards making paedophilia supposedly normal and legal. So I think if you keep your eye on what's actually happening to do with age of consent and the overt sexualising of children at school, this ties in with it. It's an attack really on the family unit and individuals. it's taken the Germans to actually be outspoken about potential problems with immigration, and the Telegraph here picked up on the fact that German cities, the German Association of Cities in fact, were warning of problems with illegal working, school children who are unable to speak German, and a rise in organised crime since the migrants arrived. Berlin, Hamburg, Dortmund and Hanover have seen a six-fold increase in economic migration from the two countries since 2006, which they say has left them struggling to cope. The report says cities are facing significant costs as a result of this poverty migration. The social balance and social peace is extremely endangered, the report says. So this is the Germans starting to bring home the reality of the open border policy. As we always say, this is not about people that are living in UK at the moment, because we know that well-established immigrants are also extremely concerned about the sheer madness of packing more people into the country when our infrastructure and hospitals and police and schools cannot cope. But of course, if you come round to the view which we've come to, that the government is actually attacking the nation, of course the agenda is to foster chaos and breakdown in the country. So if you don't like what's happening, talk to a friend and start to knock on the door of your MP. You sent me this story fairly early this morning.
I know, it made me put me off my breakfast. Tony Blair went to a party last night at, I think it was at the Dorchester Hotel, with lovely Cherry, and apparently he was donned in a medallion with his shirt open, and I think we have a picture of it there. Yeah. It was a party for Sir David Tang, and it was to celebrate the Chinese New Year. A friend of mine, Mark, pointed out how interesting that Cherie's holding two serpents, but I suppose it's Chinese New Year. Is it the year of the snake, maybe?
Well,
there he is.
If viewers can't see those, here's the first snake, and there are a couple more snakes here.
Yeah, there are loads of snakes there, actually. He was joined by a host of celebrities at this Dorchester event. Interesting that they said since leaving Downing Street, Mr. Blair is thought to have earned up to 80 million through a series of speaking engagements. However, in an interview last year, he denied being motivated by wealth, saying, "This notion that I want to be a billionaire with a yacht, I don't. I'm never going to be part of the super rich." So, well, rewind.
Well, thanks to the Mail, we've just got a couple of photographs here, which we think you should know. Remember that this is the man who is producing peace in the world. This is the man who's mixing with Nicky Gumbel and promoting supposedly the Alpha Course Christianity. Here he is mixing with the great and good. Just a few pictures of him, clearly keen to get his face into the pictures, and hobnobbing with the royalty here. And it gets an interesting mix because this article is actually flagging up the Fergies with Lady Anushka Weinberg.
Some interesting facts on her.
Well, if anybody wants to do a little bit of homework on who is the great and the good, this is an article from the New Zealand Herald, which is pointing out that this lady was originally producing soft porn, some of it with some rather unacceptable overtones, I think, because this was to do with pornography around black slaves and a riot on some form of slave estate where slaves are being whipped. So we just wonder really who these people are. Do we really want senior politicians, even ex-prime ministers like Tony Blair, do they need to be in this environment?
They need to be in The Hague.
Indeed. Speaking of hot potatoes, this one's yours.
Hot potatoes, yeah, a bit of good news. The company BASF has dropped the GM spuds for the EU, which is a really good news. Now the only thing approved for use in GM-wise in the EU is the maize. So that's a bit of good news coming. They've completely dropped it.
I think what we're showing is that overall information starting to come out about GM crops. And again, if you're new to this subject, please start doing some investigation yourself and talk about it, because it's clear to us, I think, that journalists and some of the reporters in the mainstream media are beginning to pick up on this. Yeah. Or are they?
Interesting logo those potatoes had on. I presume that's BASF's logo. just in your face, isn't it?
Mike?
Yeah, anybody wanting to research GM, of course, could do a lot worse than to watch Kirk Rutter's new film, GMO A Go-Go. Just search on YouTube for GMO A Go-Go.
GMO A Go-Go.
Thanks, Mike.
Is a very good little cartoon film explaining what the scam of GM is really about. And if we have, I'm sorry about this morning, we do try and get some humour into the programme occasionally, but if we're going to deal with potatoes hot, we need some butter.
Oh. Okay, we have been Clive de Carl, our health man, he has been talking about this for ages, and that we should be ditching margarine for butter. And what's incredible with regards to this article is that this was all picked up, this study was conducted nearly 50 years ago on the dangers, and it's only after scientists have re-gone over the research that they've discovered how bad it is for your health. Apparently once it's in the body, it's converted into a chemical called I can't read that. Arachidonic acid, which can trigger the release of other chemicals leading to inflammation, inflammation of the heart, and it causes a lead of chronic diseases if you're eating the margarine. So, you know, unfortunately, I'm ashamed they couldn't realise this 50 years ago when they put this study out for it. But
well, a lot of people are reporting to us at the moment that they're feeling tired and very run down, lacking energy, and that's one of the reasons we decided we'd start to do at least part of the programme, having a look at health. And if you start to research alternative health, you will find that there are many people pushing out effective remedies to help you feel better and more alert,
yep.
Especially if you've got a foggy mind, which is one of the things that people are reporting.
Yeah.
Well, yesterday we talked about the wonderful company Capita and how Capita in Sheffield had been issuing summonses as if they were a court and summonsing thousands of people to a court for supposedly non-payment of council tax, which turned out to not be true. Capita, we've also pointed out, was involved in many other things, but here's the Birmingham Post now reporting that a Commons inquiry has condemned the shambolic introduction of a new police interpreter service. And of course, if we follow this through, who's at the back of it? But we're straight back into Capita translation and interpreting.
Yeah, it was West Midlands Police. They were apparently have been forced to release suspects for crimes because they haven't been able to get the interpreters required. And they were using a company called Applied Language Solutions, which, surprise, surprise, is Capita.
Is Capita. So we're, Mike.
Well, actually, Patrick would like to say something on this.
Oh, Patrick Henningsen. Hello, Patrick.
Hi, Patrick.
Hello, Brian. Hello, Louise.
How are you?
Yeah, we're fine.
Fine. Yeah, the Capita Limited. It's really important for your viewers to realize that Capita is one of the central hubs of the new corporate state. So the replacement of civic and municipal bodies with the corporate body, Capita is at the center of this revolution in Britain. And this is also a trend that's going through the United States as well. So you have Capita doing a number of things, including running a large section of local councils across the country. And if you work for the council and you have to join a union, chances are that's going to be under Capita's umbrella. So it's a very interesting company. And of course, when it comes to the corporate state, you have very little recourse. But by the same token, Capita has very little legal basis to operate in the fashion that it does. These are private corporate bodies masquerading as local government or government agencies.
And of course, they're totally unaccountable, and effectively they're leading outside authority. So we're seeing that there is basically our public sector. We're better calling it the civil service, because these people are supposed to be serving the wider public. These people are simply being pushed out of their jobs, and private companies who are totally unaccountable are being slid in. So this is the corporatist, the communitarian dictatorship which is coming into place here. And I think I'd just like to say that we got curious as to why Eric Pickles was suddenly in the press over the last few days, and there were a couple of the newspapers sort of saying, well, he's a very big chap, but he's very nice, he never raises his voice, he never gets angry. And I think it was the Mail said that he's very light on his feet. He glided past the cream sofas like a pink geisha. Now, I think the aim was to try and rebrand Eric Pickles as basically a sort of a rather harmless, jolly, chubby chap. But it's his localism bill as a key part of the big society, which is actually bringing in this massive corporatisation of public services. And of course, the moment the company is also global, we have no idea who's getting close to our strategic public infrastructure. What's going on here? We are being attacked by our own government. We're watching a dictatorship being built. Any other comments, Patrick, on that?
Actually, you know, there's a really good article. I'm writing an article at the moment, but there's a great story on a website called Occupy Corporatism, and it regards to the Department of Homeland Security. Now, the privatization and the corporate state that we've seen erected here in Britain, they're doing more or less the same thing in the United States. So they've managed to privatize basically get rid of local police departments and sheriff's departments and replace them with effectively Blackwater type companies, Whack-and-Hut and G4S type companies, who are operating, and some of them are operating in dissolution. In other words, they're contracts, and they haven't even filed for the previous year. So they're stopping people for traffic tickets, and this is something you'll see we might see in Great Britain in the near future, is these private companies doing speeding tickets, coming and charging you. If you call them for a domestic disturbance, they will send you the bill. And this will be, you'll have to have an insurance policy or something like this to cover this, or it'll be under your home insurance policy or something. So this is, if you look at America and you look at some of the trends, and you look at Britain as well, you can see this convergence of a sort of corporate state. And the events in Iraq and Afghanistan are also crucial to the formation of this, because these companies' fortunes, many of them were built on the sort of overseas war theater. So the replacement of military with private mercenary firms overseas has helped build the fortunes of these companies and allowed them to come back and operate domestically in countries like Great Britain and the United States.
Yeah, well, we agree with that totally, Patrick. A little bit later in the programme, we're going to just touch on what's been happening in Wales, where private security firms have been brought into operation. The other thing that I believe is happening is that people who leave the military, highly trained, are being picked up on vast salaries to actually get them involved and locked into these companies. And we know that many ex-Army and ex-Royal Marine people are, for example, signing up with these private armies in order to get involved with anti-piracy operations, for example. So what is happening is that we see Britain's military being disbanded, and then as people come onto the streets, they can't get normal jobs, so they're being enticed into these private corporate entities with vast salaries. It's extremely dangerous. It's becoming more and more obvious what's going on, and of course, who is doing it? Well, our own government are putting these things in place. Talking of the government brings us to David Cameron, and I think he's been selling boys, is the headline.
Well, as Alex Jones calls him, Justin Bieber, he has been sold off for Conservative Party fundraising at an auction at a very exclusive club in Fulham called the Hurlingham Club. And he's been sold off to a wealthy financier, paid more than £10,000 for an exclusive backstage access to the pop sensation for 4 teenage girls. The meeting with the Canadian was sold to the highest bidder at an auction to raise money for the Tories. But apparently Justin Bieber knows nothing about this. It was all arranged by his record label, and if he decides to say no, that's going to have to return the 10 grand. What was interesting, I had a little look at the Hurlingham Club in Fulham. I don't know if you've got a picture of it, but when I did try to enter it, it wouldn't allow me, and it said it's for members only, a very swanky place, and I wonder if it has a little tinge of the American private members club Bohemian Grove, maybe, because they won't let you enter the site without being told you have to be a member.
That's true. Actually, Mike, if we just bring that one back up, because Labour MP Steve McCabe accused the Tories of a cynical bid to exploit a teen idol that would backfire. Well, whether they think he's an idol or not, do people think he's an idol? I don't know.
Well, teenage girls, some do, yes.
Okay, that was David Cameron on the right of those two pictures, if there was any confusion. What else has been going on in Parliament? Well, of course, yesterday the key topic was gay marriage, and of course that's now been pushed through. One of the things that some of our viewers have pointed out to us is that the gay marriage bill has come without any attachment of adultery. So presumably if you're in a gay marriage, you're in a fairly open marriage. That may not be popular with all of our viewers, but we are commenting as we see it. The important thing is that the House, of course, was packed. In contrast, I've just chosen this as an example to what the House thought about such very serious topics of what's happening in the press and the media and state gagging of our free press. So here they are, they can hardly be bothered to actually get into the Commons. And of course,
there's more there, isn't there, than what was there with the child abuse?
Exactly. If we were, which unfortunately I haven't got available, but if we were to call up a picture of the House of Commons when there was a debate on child abuse, there was about 12 people there. So it gives us a focus. David Cameron has said that gay marriage is the most important thing for this country to concentrate on. Never mind child abuse, the failure of the NHS or the deaths of 1,200 people in Staff's Hospital, the fact the transport system doesn't work, the schools are having problem, and the pressures of immigration. David Cameron seems fixated on the subject of gay marriage. In the background, of course,
Right.
Are you there, Patrick?
Yeah. Just quickly I wanted to comment on the same trend is happening in the United States right now as we speak. The Obama administration, whether they're doing this to score cheap political points is anyone's guess, but the big issues this week with Obama was that he was going to implement a gay policy in his immigration reform. Okay, and the second one was, this was big news in the White House this week, that Obama wanted to end the ban on gays in the Boy Scouts of America. And of course, this is a Boy Scouts of America that had a massive pedophile scandal, some 20,000 documents that were covered up regarding past pedophile activity with Scout leaders. But still, the White House, like David Cameron, is putting these gay issues one after another, in gays in the military, gay marriage, gays in the Boy Scouts, gays in immigration reform. So you can see the same talking points across the Atlantic. So I don't know what you make of that.
Well, my response to this is actually, and I know this is a very emotive subject for a lot of people, but gays are actually being used. The state is using gays, and what the state agenda is to actually break down the heterosexual family. So gays at the moment are simply being used as a political tool. The state does not want the family unit existing. We are sensing more and more that the real state agenda is that effectively children will be born, they will be brought into an education system at the earliest age they possibly can, say 3 years old, and they'll be retained to 18. The role of the family will simply be as a sort of guardian, as long as the family toes the accepted political line. If, of course, you don't toe the political line, then your children will be taken away by the state. Yeah. So the state is now going to farm families and babies. And the other group who are clearly being used for a political agenda are disabled people, because we've seen over many years a huge drive for equality in all respects with disabled people. Many people would say, including us, of course that should be the way the world works. But now, having promoted disabled people, what we're now seeing is the state is pulling the rug from under them, particularly where they're reliant on benefits. And we're being told that these people are sort of scroungers on society, or many of them. So this is a political agenda where the state wants to break apart the family unit, and they want to do that because when people are isolated as individuals or children, of course it's much easier for the state to control us.
They're doing a good job, aren't they?
They're doing a good job. And the other thing which is already come into the press was a document which I think the Mail talked about, saying that government officials were already talking about lowering the age of consent to 14. And we have heard some very interesting stories from social workers where they are picking up, they're sensing that the next government agenda is that paedophilia is to be legalised.
In Vatican City, is the legal age of consent
12, I believe.
It is 12, wasn't it?
Yeah. So we'll leave you to think about that. As always, please research it yourself. But we certainly would like to know why Mr. Cameron's head is full of gays rather than the more serious subjects affecting the country at the moment. We'll just mention this little article here. A council, I'm sorry, I can't remember which one it was, but it's in the article if you're going to have a look at it.
Norfolk.
Is it Norfolk Council has said that they've got to effectively pull in more money because the Savile investigations is costing them more. Other people are picking up on this website called Turkish Living, and interestingly enough, somebody else here, council tax rise blamed on Jimmy Savile's sex probe as police demand more resources. How about deducting the money from those institutions that failed all those youngsters? So we can see people beginning to think about it, but of course there's no money for protecting British children. But if we want to start another war in Mali, then David Cameron, Miliband and Clegg simply open the pot and out the money comes. Yeah. What's been happening with the investigation into...
there's been 2 more arrests with regards to the Elm House guest house. Is it Elm House? I think?
Elm House, yeah.
Elm House guest house, yeah. A 70-year-old man was arrested in Sussex, and a 66-year-old was arrested in Norfolk. With regards to this, interesting, it's Operation Fernbridge. The 70-year-old man worked for Richmond Council back in the day. Operation Fernbridge centres around claims that a group of senior establishment figures sexually abused boys in council care throughout the 80s. Interesting here that they list former ministers, senior MPs, top police officers, and those linked to the royal household are alleged to have indecently assaulted vulnerable underage boys at the care home and a nearby guest house.
And of course what we're seeing starting to emerge is is the spectrum of people that long-time campaigners like Bill Maloney from Pie and Mash Films have been warning about for years, that the paedophile rings in Britain are actually controlled from very, very wealthy people at high levels of the establishment. So we'd just like to say very nicely to Britain's policemen and women, please will you do your job on this one and get these people exposed and put in prison.
And I must say, maybe fair play to Tom Watson for starting to help launch this
I think a lot of people were very suspicious when he started it.
Yep.
Mike, banking. You've got good old Barclays here.
Yeah. This came out yesterday. Somehow I didn't manage to make it in, but anyway, Barclays...
technical error, it was called. I'll talk to the production team, which is us, I believe. Okay.
Right, so Barclays, according to the Telegraph, has increased its provision for missold interest rate swaps and payment protection insurance by a further $1 billion. And as a result, Chief Executive Anthony Jenkins waived his bonus for 2012, which is delightful. Now, Barclays was in front of the Banking Standards Committee yesterday, and after that, the same Anthony Jenkins was there along with the chairman, Sir David Walker. Sir David called for a register of bank employments who are fired for misdemeanours, apparently. So basically, first of all, I'm quite interested in the language that he's calling fraud and corruption a misdemeanour. And basically what he's suggesting is that if anybody who's caught carrying out one of these misdemeanors will go on a register, and they'll possibly have trouble finding another job in the City of London. Doesn't say anything about perhaps getting arrested, investigated for criminal acts. But anyway, a register. That's a good step forward. Barclays are basically trying to distance themselves now from Bob Diamond, but I mean, I don't think they really are going to.
Well, they're trying to blame everything on one or two people is the key thing that I see, Mike. What's Osborne doing about this then?
Well, nothing, as you can imagine. This is a Telegraph article really commenting on Osborne's comments about bank separation. They're calling it the electrified fence. So the idea is to fence off, to ring fence banks, retail and investment banking arms. Osborne came out a day or two ago saying that he was going to electrify it by basically holding the idea of full separation of the banks over the heads of the banks, that if they don't stick to the regulatory requirements, they could be split. Really, this is pressure from backbenchers and so on has caused Osborne to go that far. I don't think he really wanted to go that far at all, but nonetheless, I also don't believe for one second that he would ever implement the threats that he's talking about. So anybody that's suggesting that Osborne is getting tough with the banks, it's just more play acting.
Well, absolutely. I just can't imagine any meeting where George Osborne is being tough. The only meeting I can imagine is he's sitting there receiving his instructions from the bankers, or else, Osborne, you're going to be out your job. But he's raising taxes, is it? Well,
the allegation is that he's going to have to raise taxes to plug a £64 billion black hole. Telegraph suggesting that this is a major blow for the country's leading for the country. This is a leading public finance think tank. I think it's the Institute of Fiscal Studies has warned that there's a £64 billion black hole that Osborne needs to fill. And he's going to have to raid people's assets in order to do that, and raise taxes and whatnot. 64 billion doesn't even scratch the surface of the black hole that exists in the public finances, never mind the finances of the country as a whole. We're going to do a major article in the progress of doing a major article for this issue of the column, which will be finished next week. And we're going to be covering this in detail, just exactly the size of the black hole in this country's finances.
Yeah. Well, looking into the criminal cartel of the banksters, we just mentioned this Independent article here, which says RBS chief to step down without payoff after rate fixing scandal. So millions of people have been defrauded, but you just step down. The Money Markets website had some comments to say. So it's actually talking about the events here, but it's saying that Mr. John Hurricane is standing down, and he's losing 4 million, or a bit over 4 million, I think. But they're pointing out that there was 400 million involved in the internal rigging aspect of it, and he's the only fall guy. Where's the rest of them? So this article, I think, is quite interesting, because it's saying, hang on a minute, why are we only going for this one man? And I think this is the key thing. They're throwing a few people to the wolves in order to try and dupe the public into believing that the whole problem's gone away. You get put into prison for fiddling benefits by a few pounds, but if you actually fiddle massive sums of money, then you just simply let go from your job.
But given a big payoff.
Absolutely. It's corruption is what it's called. And Mike, what's happening in the Middle East? And we can bring Patrick in here, I think.
Well, this article is in the New York Times. Basically, John O'Brien, who is the White House counter-terrorism advisor, is going to be in front of a Senate hearing tomorrow. He is Obama's nominee for CIA director. And one of the interesting things about this article, it highlights that Brennan has served as the principal coordinator of a kill list of so-called Al-Qaeda operatives marked for death. He oversees drone strikes by the military and the CIA, and he's advising Obama on which strikes he should approve. Now, Brennan is a former CIA station chief in Riyadh, and it's interesting that the New York Times admits here that he worked closely with Saudi Arabia to gain approval for a secret CIA drone base in Saudi Arabia, from where American strikes on foreign nations are launched. And again, I'm going to ask Patrick to comment on this, but it just again highlights the close relationship between the United States, Saudi Arabia, Britain, Saudi Arabia. Saudi is absolutely key to the agenda that's going on in the Middle East at the moment, and hopefully, Patrick, you can say something about that.
Yes, that's the existence of a previously secret drone base in Saudi Arabia. So existence means it is operational. But this takes up so much space in this public discourse. These nominations that come up in Washington, and Leon Panetta and people like this, and you have David Petraeus, and the director of the CIA is basically somebody who is ready and able to take the fall if the you-know-what hits the fan. That's their main job, but they don't actually have as much say in operational matters as some of the other sort of high-ranking people in NSA or in the Pentagon, and indeed in the White House. But certainly this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, but it is a bit shocking that, because if the U.S. has a hidden base in Saudi Arabia for drone strikes, which are completely in contravention of all international law, then where else have they got bases? What other black sites do they have? And what we can see here is an overseas sort of Romanesque militarized empire that is totally out of control. And there's more homeless people in the United States than any other first world country, but yet they're expanding like crazy, and each of these drones costs X amount of millions. So we're getting a real glimpse into what's really going on. Where is the outrage? Well, at the moment, we're going to wait for that. But Obama's going to have a very rough second term, I predict. And I predict probably by the end of it, he'll be either the first president to be impeached, or he will be forced to resign, very close to the way Bill Clinton was.
Patrick, I saw an article. Sorry, I saw an article earlier that he could possibly he won't see out. It's quite possibly he won't see out his second term. I think it was LaRouche who said that. I don't know if you've seen that.
They've got so many domestic scandals. Plus, he's really pushing the United States towards a war. The announcement that was made Tuesday was that the U.S. is pressuring the European Commission to label Hezbollah in Lebanon as a terrorist entity. Now, this is a major step backwards and completely divorced from reality. It's like saying we need to label Sinn Féin now as a terrorist group because they're already in politics. Hezbollah, they're already part of the legal sovereign government in Lebanon. So what they're doing is they have these, the Bulgarian bus bombing last year, which Bulgaria blamed on Hezbollah. I mean, give me a break. There is more evidence to say this is likely to be an Israeli bombing that was used as a false flag to blame on Hezbollah. But again, what this is they're trying to open the door for a regional war because they cannot get into Syria in a military fashion directly. So they want to make it a regional war, and that is not good news for the people of the Middle East, and it's certainly not good news for people of Europe or the United States, because the danger is that this could spread into a wider Asian theater, including Iran.
Yeah.
The next article that we wanted to cover was from the BBC, saying neighbours at war in Lebanon's divided city of Tripoli. And the main thrust of this article, as far as I could, the one thing that really struck me about it was the section which describes how the thinking of the parents are pushed onto the children at a very young age, and it reminds me in many ways of the kind of sectarianism that was going on in Northern Ireland all the time I was there. Just wondered if you comment on that.
Yeah, it's Lebanon, as I said in the article, I wrote a couple of weeks ago, it's sectarianism par excellence. You can't find a country that's more divided under a sectarian basis. But by the same token, Lebanon has lived with that, has understood that, and is existing and is slowly moving forward. It's gotten past its hard sectarian divisions already. The country was mired in 20 or 30 years of so-called civil war. Of course, it wasn't completely civil. A lot of outside forces involved in that. But I also find it interesting, this is a typical, we have to remember, this is a typical BBC story where they send their reporter in and they do the human interest thing and they interview this battle-hardened father that's been doing this and that and the other. But you don't see the BBC expending this level of energy going to places like Aleppo or places in Syria where there are terrorist, militant guerrilla groups that are being funded and armed from the outside the country and who are killing people and causing disruption and destabilization in that country. They're not expending that kind of energy, and they always default back to these sort of stories, which is a nice enough story, but it's a typical BBC-style story. In this way, you can see how the mainstream media is able to sculpt the conversation and the discourse according to these sort of set lines that they traditionally take, but not really getting in, doing any hard journalism, looking at the real fraud that's involved. Because obviously, if the BBC did that, they would be running against the Foreign Office, whose agenda is to topple the regime in Syria and to, allow whatever comes after that, which is probably, economic colonization of the country. But it is an interesting story, yes. And there is sectarian history in Lebanon. It's deep. But the last thing any Lebanese people want is to see any of the sort of violence that's happening next door in Syria to spill over into their country, even if they have sectarian issues.
Yeah. Patrick, thank you for that analysis, and particularly picking up on the BBC. I was shocked to be told this morning that people are actually still watching BBC 1 o'clock news. I hope they're going to move across to us. But it's quite clear that the BBC is simply a propaganda machine for the government. And if we even look at the subject of child abuse, the speed at which the BBC has run away from this subject, a whole pack of lies been told by BBC Scotland over their pulling out of the Holly Gregg abuse of the young Down syndrome girl. They've refused to get involved and interview victims around Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. So it's very clear that when you really start looking at the higher levels of the BBC, a lot of employees, 55,000 I think or thereabouts, and clearly a lot of good people in the BBC, but the management is simply as machinery for the government. Yeah.
Brian, can I say something quickly?
Yes, indeed.
I'll just share a very personal story with you. Within hours of getting off the plane from Lebanon, I was in my local, and an BBC News executive producer, I believe, who's been with the corporation for years. I got an absolute dressing down because I questioned how the BBC and their sister organization, Al Jazeera, was covering the events in Syria and Libya. And I was told that the BBC is not unbiased and it has never skewed any of its news coverage, and that I would never work for the BBC, and that I work for a Russia, Putin's propaganda outlet, which I actually don't get paid by Russia today. I do that voluntarily. But that is the level of arrogance. And this is someone who's on 120K a year with a golden parachute talking to a citizen journalist who's mostly more or less a volunteer. How wonderful the BBC is, and how dare I criticize. That is the level of arrogance. I didn't even mention Jimmy Savile, Brian.
Yeah.
Because I would have brought tears to this guy's eye. I would have had him in an epileptic fit if I even brought that up.
Oh, you should have done it, Patrick.
They're in total denial, Brian.
Well, I think there's something else going on here, Patrick, and I think that the BBC in particular has suddenly realised that people don't need them. There is so much free media alternative media now producing good quality programming, and well, that's a really bad
Radio
term to
shows.
use, isn't it? But we're getting the information out. And we've also experienced the BBC trying to coerce us into actually getting involved in one of their so-called documentary programmes. And when we turned down their offer, they eventually said, "But why won't you work with us?" And we said, "Because you're biased, you're a propaganda machine, you simply work for the government, you don't tell the truth." And you could feel the jolt. So these people have never been challenged, but the key point is we do not need the BBC. They're irrelevant, and if enough people start broadcasting, you're doing it, many other people can do it, we can simply sidestep them. I think they are a disgraceful organisation, and we're going to be doing a documentary on the BBC later this year. There's all sorts of information coming together.
Loads.
Patrick, before we let you go, we noticed that on 21st Century Wire you'd got a very interesting article about suicides climbing in the American military.
Yes.
Would you like
Yes.
to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, this is it's really there's more. Everyone's familiar with the stat that there's more soldiers who died by suicide than have died on the field of battle in Iraq and Afghanistan, and this is just proving something that a lot of us already knew, that this is down to the drugs being prescribed. They're handing out like Smarties. So this is only a reflection of what's happening in American society and in European society to a lesser degree. Yeah. But especially American society. So, and I find it quite sad, really. And the other reason, I mean, why are these soldiers depressed? And I was talking to a U.S. Not active anymore, but recently unactive. He's been not active for about 15 years, but he was deployed during the first Gulf War, a U.S. Marine, and he said the reason the U.S. soldiers are depressed and have to be taking Paxil and Prozac and all these antidepressants is because they're out there, they're fighting, they're being told they're fighting for their country and fighting terrorism and killing brown people is wonderful, and they're basically living a lie, and that has a psychological effect. And a lot of the active military people are aware that it's a load of you-know-what. And this has been spoken to me even by active duty British soldiers, that they have no idea what they're doing out there. So that's got to have a psychological effect. And of course, to medicate that, you're taking antidepressants and the suicidal medication, basically, that's being advertised every day on TV and given to school children.
Yeah. Well, Patrick, I'll pick up on that because we know from what we're being told by ex-military people here in Britain that servicemen and women coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan are being advised to take psychotropic drugs in order to prevent later symptoms of post-traumatic stress. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with them when they arrive in this country, but then they're being almost forcibly told that they're going to take Prozac or something equivalent in order to prevent problems in the future. And we've had some young men, clearly they are telling the truth about seeing lightly wounded soldiers coming back from Afghanistan who are on the plane, they're laughing and joking, they're in good physical condition apart from minor injuries. And when they've met those guys a few months later, as in their words, these men were off their heads and they had supposedly been processed through some form of counselling and psychiatric counselling. And we've had other reports of soldiers saying that when they were in counselling with psychiatrists, they were actually told to commit suicide. Now, these are incredible statements, but the significance is that we started to receive this information about 2 years ago from military people who were in different units and didn't know each other. So there is something very strange going on here, but clearly we would agree that these very dangerous drugs are actually being used to attack people. And of course the other part of the problem is that troops go and do their job overseas, very, very stressful. They are then kicked out the military by David Cameron and his cronies, and there are no jobs. So if you want to stress people out, you bring them back from a war zone, kick them out the army, and then there are no jobs for them. I believe the same thing was done in the First World War.
Yeah, if you look at the average profile of these young men, they're fit, they're motivated, they're a bit stronger than your average male of the same age bracket, and they're going overseas challenged by a lot of different things in their environment. And normally these would be future leaders as soon as you repatriate them back to British or American society. But instead, they're giving them preemptive medication treatments and turning them into, many of them into sort of psychological wrecks. And again, you have the situation that you just mentioned, Brian, where there's absolutely no jobs. If they don't get a job with a military contractor, and that is basically all that's available, they're unemployed, or they have to re-enlist for another tour. So this is a vicious cycle that we see.
Okay. Right, thanks for that. I've got an eye on the clock. We're overrunning, which we're delighted to do because the aim is to give people as much as we get. Mike, you've got some information on Mr. Hune here.
Well,
just
actually,
bring it up. It's okay. I'll take it through.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I just thought this was a really interesting headline that the partner of Mr. Hume was being referred by Mr. Hume's ex-wife as a man. And it just seems a little strange. But later on, if you actually read the contents of this article, then you discover that, in fact, the emails passing between Hume's ex-wife and the journalist at the Sunday Times definitely point towards there being some kind of collusion between them. They in fact agreed among themselves that they would phone Hume and try to get him to admit that he had that he was lying about the points on his license in a phone call, a recorded phone call. They tried this 4 times, and none of those telephone conversations would he actually admit that he had done this. Now, he may have suspected that he was being recorded and was being just very careful. I don't know, but there just seems to be a little more to this story than meets the eye.
Yeah, and one of the angles is, of course, that the story has been ramped up in order to for further criticism to be levelled at the press, that the press were helping to create this story. Now we can come for yet more Leveson and let's control the media. Yeah. But it is a very interesting article there, what's happening. What have the Argentinians been up to?
Well, it's just interesting that this is another area where attention is being ramped up. So there's a tit-for-tat battle going on. The British are saying something, the Argentines are saying something. You've got the Sun newspapers somehow putting full-page ads in the Argentinian media saying, get your hands off the Falklands. This whole Falklands thing is being ramped up. Just another region of the planet heading towards another war. But a war that Britain on its own can't prosecute the way they did in the past. So it's this chaotic policy of the present government, really.
Yeah, chaotic but deliberate. Well, we had to give Scotland a mention, and the Independent's reporting that Scotland is aiming for an official exit from the UK in 2016. Have you got that slide there, Mike, please? Yeah. So here it is. Scotland would formally break away from the UK in March 2016 if next year's referendum results in a vote in favour of independence under a timetable drawn up by the Scottish Government. It's great for Mr Cameron to have allowed the rest of us in UK to have some form of say in what's going on and what he's doing. But of course the European agenda was always that Britain should be divided up, England into 9 EU regions, plus Scotland and Wales as separate countries. But of course the huge lie here that's coming out of what's happening in Scotland, and the Deputy First Minister here, Nicola Sturgeon, I mean, can you credit it? She says that the plans represented a clear roadmap for a move to becoming a nation in which the powers of our national parliament are complete and in which the people are sovereign. That has got to be the greatest lie told in 2013, because of course what they're really offering the Scottish people are to become a vassal state within the European Union. They are not going to be a free and sovereign nation. They're simply going to be a region within the EU. And what can they expect? Well, of course, we can see this from what's going on in Europe, and in particular Greece. So the government's now had a massive clampdown on the ferry crewmen who were striking, so I couldn't think of the right word there. So they've been forced to return to work under some fairly draconian Greek government rules. And
it's not even Greek government really anymore, is
well,
it?
no, it's European bankers running the country. So what we're really seeing is if you attempt to challenge the system and you don't like the austerity, then you can stand by, because you're either going to work or we're going to put you in prison. And this, of course, is the European Union superstate and dictatorship. On the subject of child abuse, an interesting article in the Express. There's been a report released saying that it's thought child neglect cases are on the rise, and there's a really heart-rending story about the number of teachers and social workers are reporting that children are being neglected, and it's terrible. It's all on the rise. When you dig into the story, you find that the report they're referring to has come from this organisation, Action for Children. Now, this is a supposed charity, but we've had our eye on Action for Children for some time. This is the front cover of their report. These are some of the more interesting statistics about them, that they are running several operating companies, and their industry from dealing with children is worth 197 million. And what are the associated companies? Action for Children Services Limited, Action for Children Trading Limited, Action for Children Development Limited. And of course, the more children that become neglected, the better the business is for these sorts of charities. And of course, if we look at who's working with who, they're very closely connected with other think tanks and the government. Is there more to this than meets the eye?
Definitely.
What's been happening in Wales, finally?
Well, this came through from Kaz, who's a viewer, just literally as we're about to go on air. There's a company called, I think it's X4 they're called, I haven't got the story in front of me, and they've taken to the streets of Torfaen, apologies if I'm not pronouncing that right, and they're going to be slapping fixed penalty notices on for, I think,
fines and litter, dog ends.
Litter and dog mess. And if you take a look at this X4
it's
website,
what Patrick's talking about,
yeah,
because
basically.
this is effectively...
And X4, their website's very interesting, and so are their staff members. And yeah, please take a look. And these guys are going to be walking around the streets of Torfaen and possibly many other cities around the country.
And of course, the issuing of fines without you having been judged by a jury of your peers is actually unlawful at common law. So what they are doing is unlawful. But of course, the government doesn't care, because the objective is to get these private armies to the lowest level of society. I know we've got to end there. Patrick, one last comment, if you've got it.
Yes, with regards to the private police, if you look at their actual contract with the city or the municipality, it's to secure the city or to secure property, much the same way a rent-a-cop will be charged to secure the building. That's the sort of level of depth in the job description. So this sort of protect and serve relationships with the community, these are all things right out the window in the 21st century corporate state. It's to secure the city, to secure the town, so forth.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Patrick.
Okay. Well,
Thank
thank you, Patrick. As always, if you're wondering what you can do about this, the key thing is to get talking, get exposing, because exposure brings these people down very, very quickly. And don't mistrust everyone. The bulk of people are good people, but the real damage is being done at the high levels. The British government is now attacking its own people.
Well, just a quick announcement. Is it Friday? You're doing an early show?
Friday.
Friday, but
Well
you're doing
done.
a 12 o'clock show on Friday.
This Friday coming.
This Friday coming. And as of next week, we are not going to be on because we're going to be, well, you guys mainly, you're going to be finishing the paper and writing.
Yep, so if you're waiting for a UK column with increasing frustration, we'll be off air next week while we get our the final parts of the paper completed and that edition out, and then we'll have some exciting new announcements. And before I forget, can I give a warm welcome to the viewers and the groups who are in the Czech Republic. So thank you for joining us, and thanks very much for getting in contact with us. It's great to know that the news is spreading. So stop watching the BBC, tune in with UK Column Live tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye-bye.